G'day guys, Jazz here and welcome to the video. For those of you who are new, my name is Jazz. I'm a consultant radiologist based in Australia. In today's video, I thought I would reflect on my time back in medical school and see whether or not I thought the subjects taught prepared me well enough for my internship year back in 2014. Then at the end of the video, I'll give my 5 tips on what I think probably are the most vital components of medical school and what I thought prepared me the most to be a junior doctor. Now, as I've mentioned previously, my medical program was 5 years in length. The first 3 years being the preclinical years, where we covered topics such as pathology, physiology, pharmacology, biochemistry, and all that fun stuff, but largely stuff that was learnt out of a textbook. We also had problem-based learning sessions, or PBL sessions, as I'm sure you're all aware of, involve getting into groups and a tutorial type of learning where each week you're given a different case or pathology, and the week's learning is basically centered around that condition. Then the final 2 years of the program are the clinical years, where you're spending a majority of your time doing clinical placement, whether that's in a hospital or at a clinic. That could be a GP clinic or a mental health clinic. Now, although you'd spend a majority of those last 2 years in the hospital or at the clinic, you'd also come back to uni for various lectures and tutorials to try and assist you on your learning throughout whatever placement block that you're currently on. So now I'll go through the various elements of preclinical and clinical years and basically give my thoughts on what I thought were useful or what I wish I'd spent more time doing, and then also what I think is probably less useful. So starting with the preclinical years, I think the most useful component that was a part of my program was the PBL tutorials. So the problem-based learning. I think firstly, the most important and valuable thing that's taught out of the PBL sessions is teamwork. Medicine is a team sport. You see it all the time, through all my years of working. You're never working individually. You're always bouncing ideas off of each other with the collective goal of trying to get the best outcome for the patient. The second thing I think that is great about the PBL sessions is that it teaches you a very good way of thinking about problems. So you'll get your presenting complaint or clinical history, and initially you've got no idea what's going on. But what the process essentially teaches you is to have a collected and systematic approach to a problem, and working through it step by step in order to work out firstly the diagnosis or the pathology, and then also working out what the appropriate management is for the patient. The third thing that I really liked about the PBL setup was each week was a different condition, so that first of all keeps things interesting. But I always found within the preclinical years, although you're in medical school, you don't really feel like you're doing medicine or becoming a doctor, because a lot of the stuff that you're learning and studying is really just kind of science-based topics. And everyone's really waiting to get into those clinical years where they can finally feel like I'm actually a medical student, I'm going to be a doctor at some stage. So I always felt like these PBL sessions were really the only part of the preclinical years where I really felt like I was thinking like a doctor, thinking up with a diagnosis and a management plan for the patient. And overall, I just think it's a more interesting way to learn rather than just reading textbook on textbook on textbook. Now we move on to what I think were probably the less useful aspects of preclinical year teaching. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is all the in-depth science, biochemistry, pharmacology, and all that kind of stuff that we're kind of forced to learn, but I don't think is entirely relevant to becoming a practicing doctor. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the stuff that's taught in those subjects can be useful, but I can't remember the last time I was rushing to a code blue or a critical patient and the intensivist kind of turns and looks to me and goes, "Jazz, what is the fourth step of the Krebs cycle?" Like, that just doesn't happen So I think a lot of the topics could probably be more streamlined, and streamlined in a way that they're relevant to what you'll be utilizing as a doctor in the future, rather than learning it from, I suppose, the aspect of being a scientist or a pharmacologist or a biochemist or all those kind of things. Although I have to say, one subject that I've found, or I've heard from a lot of junior doctors or medical students, is the depth of anatomy that's been taught recently. Now, my program had a pretty good anatomy subject and was taught quite well, but I've heard from a lot of people that it's kind of being a bit skipped over, and the anatomy taught to students these days can be a bit limited. And although not everyone wants to be a surgeon or a radiologist where the anatomy is kind of utilised a bit more than in other specialties, it's still a very important thing to have. And it is probably something that you're quizzed on by, your surgeons and those kind of bosses when you do those terms as a junior doctor. And, you don't want to be that guy that just has no idea when you get quizzed in theatre or something like that. Now, funny story in regards to that. I remember many years ago where I heard about an applicant that had been applying to get onto radiology training. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, boosting your CV is quite important when you're trying to apply onto specialty training, because you want to increase your chances of getting on. So teaching and all those kind of things are they're regarded quite highly on the CV. Now, this person decided they said on their CV that they had done quite a lot of anatomy tutoring for the local university. So this person's in the interview, and in a lot of radiology interviews, they like to show you just some basic films and stuff like that, just to see, have you seen an X-ray before, or do you have an approach to an X-ray? And so remember, this person has said that they're an anatomy tutor, so you would assume that their knowledge of anatomy is pretty good. So the people on the panel have put up an X-ray of a wrist, and they've gone to the candidate, okay, then can you just point out and label the carpal bones on this radiograph? And there was just awkward silence. So the lesson here is, don't lie on your CV, and also learn your anatomy. So now, guys, we move into the clinical years of the program, which, like I said before, for me were my final 2 years. And I think the clinical years are the most useful part of the degree. And I guess the first time when you start going on placement and you get involved with the medical teams in the hospital or clinics, and you really start feeling like, all right, I'm almost a doctor, and that's an exciting feeling. Now, on your placements, you'll generally be allocated to a certain team within a certain specialty. So you'll be meeting and spending a lot of time with junior doctors, keeping in mind that these people will probably be your registrars or senior residents once you make it to your internship. And then you'll also meet various consultants or specialists as well, who will give you a bit of an insight into what your future could be like if you decide to go into this certain specialty. Now, I know a lot of students, and don't get me wrong, I was like this as well, and everyone wants to kind of see the cool things. You want to do the interesting things. You want to go in, scrub in into, that Whipple's procedure or whatever it is, and spend a lot of your time around the senior registrars, like where you're seeing the cool things. But my tip here would be spend more time on the wards. I think a lot of people, like I said, want to see all the cool stuff, do the interesting things, but you have to remember the jobs that you're going to be doing once you start working as an intern or, second year doctor are largely going to be ward-based. So I think students, particularly when you're in your final year of medical school, need to start prioritizing spending a bit more time on the wards. Get really good at your basic procedures like cannulating. That's crucial because you'll be doing thousands of them in your internship year. Spend a lot of time reviewing patients, hang out with the interns, residents, go review the sick patients and kind of understand what they're looking for. How do you identify a sick patient? And then also learn how to document the clinical reviews, charting up basic stuff. Even if you learn how to chart up medication or fluids, That's all stuff that's really going to be vital to you once you start as an intern. Now, if I think back to when I was a resident doctor or my second year of working, and we'd always get new interns coming onto the team, and I would always appreciate the interns that were able to go around and do cannulas without having to come and ask for assistance. Not to say that I wasn't happy to help, but you can always tell the student who's practiced hundreds of cannulas and feels very confident with them and can get them done, as opposed to the student who kind of avoided them during their medical school days and, has only done about 10 or 15. It really shows. So now to my 5 tips for making the most out of medical school. Number 1, don't stress so much about the grades that you get and enjoy the process. Now, I know all medical students are kind of wired in a way to be high achievers, essentially. We're all like that. Medical school is no easy thing to get into. So we always want to get the best grades that we can, and everyone's always aiming to get an A or something like that because that's just what you've been used to for your whole life. But in medical school, I don't think it matters as much. So I think it's important that you enjoy the process, have a good time, and as long as you're doing your best, you should be happy with that. Number 2, clinical placements are gold. So make sure that you attend all of them, spend a lot of time soaking it all up. And as I mentioned before, try and prioritize a bit more time spent with the junior doctors on the team. So like I said before, whether it's going to clinical reviews, learning how to document, or learning how to write up fluids and stuff like that, that's all very important. And then even on top of that, I think a bit of time spent with a junior doctor, if you can ask them to tag along on one of their after hours shifts, that will probably be, such good learning for you that I'd highly recommend it, because that's the kind of stuff that you'll be doing once you start working. And I maintain most of the learning as a junior doctor is spent on the after hours shifts, where you don't have all that support that you would normally have during the day with all the seniors, and you really start practicing your medicine and making good clinical decisions. Number 3 would be to network as a student. So when you go on your rotations or your clinical placements, try and get to know everyone on the team, whether it's the interns, the residents, the registrars, the consultants. I know it can be scary when you're the new medical student on the team, and it's always hard to kind of just jump in and try and get involved with everyone and get everyone to know you, and etc. But I think the way you look at that is that a lot of these junior doctors are probably going to be your registrars once you finally start working. And the consultants that you've seen, majority of them are going to be there. Chances are they'll still be there as a consultant when you come in as an intern. So I think it will make your life easier if you get to know all of these people, and then when you come back to the hospital to work, it'll just be a lot of familiar faces. You'll feel a lot more comfortable, and on top of that, you'll have a lot of people that you can ask for advice in sticky situations. Number 4 would be to try and get involved in research projects. Now, I know research is not everyone's cup of tea. It can be a bit boring, but it is kind of vital component of the training as a junior doctor. And I think the earlier you start doing research, the easier you'll make your life later on once you start working. Because when you're a student or a medical student, you do have that luxury of not having to work on top of studying. So I think if you use that extra time to try and get a couple of projects done before you start working, then that will be great. And as I've mentioned before, research, everyone's looking for research when you're applying to your specialty training programs. So I think the more research you do, the earlier, the better. Now, number 5 would be now I know this can be a bit hard, but try and work out what specialty you want to do relatively early on, if you can. Now, I know it's hard, but usually every specialty training program is so competitive. So the earlier you can try and decide, whether you even limit it down to 1, 2, or 3 options, then at least you can start targeting your CV and research and all that kind of stuff towards those specialties, and you can increase your chances of getting onto the training program earlier. Now, I know that's not everyone's aim, and it doesn't have to be, but that's just my opinion. I know I've got a lot of friends and colleagues that, they just want to have a good time, locum and just see what happens. But I think for me, I knew that I wanted to get onto training as soon as possible and kind of just get to the end of this super long road to becoming a specialist. So if you feel like that at all, then I would consider trying to get an idea of what you might want to do pretty early on. So guys, that's my take on medical school and which components I think are more useful than others. Now, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.